6, 5. That's so funny. Hey, we're now broadcasting live, apparently, which is great. Well, welcome. I hope you can all hear me. We're just a couple of minutes early, which is good. And just waiting for more people to start to join. I can see we've got a good quorum so far. So we'll be starting in a minute or so. Just some little notes. You will be able to chat. We're going to ask you some questions at various points, making this presentation interactive. So you'll be able to use the chat function on the right-hand side. While we're just waiting to get going properly, you might want to give it a go and just say hello to some of your other delegates that are on here. And we're also operating question and answer as well. So you should be able to ask questions and also vote questions up and down. So if you want to try some of those out, that's good. Oh, hello, thank you. You can see, hello. Oh, there. Well, we got loads of people saying, "Oh, that's fantastic." Look at that. We may be virtual, but we're social. That's good. So that's working. Hopefully, the chat, the Q&A is working as well. And what we'll do at the end is ask or answer questions from those. And obviously, the ones that are voted up will tend to rise to the top, so we'll tend to talk about those ones. You've got us for the next hour or so. We're going to have questions at the end because we've got a lot of material that we want to take you through. It's one of my failings as a presenter, unfortunately, is I always want to kind of show so much. In the end, we actually ended up cutting out quite a lot from here, but we've got lots of content to get through anyway. You'll see that you're in good company here. People are still joining, so I'll just carry on waffling for a second before we start officially. These are just some of the logos of clients that are in attendance today. If your logo isn't on there, apologies. There were just so many, we couldn't cram them in. And indeed, we even had to turn some people away. So there's 230 people registered, and that's from 125 companies. Those of you who've done any persuasion or kind of behavioral science applied to design and everything will recognize what I'm doing with that. There's a bit of authority in there, there's a bit of social proof in there, and a bit of scarcity in there as well. So well done us all for actually making it through the barrier and coming onto this webinar. That's a bit of unity coming in as well. So you can see all of these cheesy techniques. You can use them really quite cheesily like that, or they can be more subtle. So we're going to show you some of the subtlety of this. It is, however, a big topic, and we're only doing an hour here, which is a very brief introduction, but we'll take you through some of the kind of highlights and the theories, and hopefully you will get that. Now, today is a really cool day for me. It's the first day back in our Oxfordshire office. It's the first time I've been here for 5 months. I came here because I've got slightly dodgy broadband at home, so I thought this would be more safe and secure. You can see we've got lie detector in the background. We don't use that anymore. We've got slightly more sophisticated things, but you can see also we've got our labs. These are our labs in London. They're just opening and becoming back in use after 5 months layoff, and I was doing all of our research remotely. So if you have a need for face-to-face research or testing, we are now offering that as well. It's fully safe. You can see that the screens are there. We've got various protocols in operation, hand sanitizer, and the way that we do that is all very safe and secure. And we've been trialing this for a number of weeks now. So if you've got a need for that, do come back to us. Right. In the introduction to this and the invitation for this, we asked, which toaster would you choose? This is quite a well-known one, but I think it's, really quite a good basic example of how just certain manipulations can change the way that customers and indeed we choose to do various things. So if there's two toasters, imagine that these are both at John Lewis or somewhere. There's one that's £15, one that's £30. Which would you choose? Well, probably about half the people would choose the cheaper one, half the people would choose the more expensive one. Average sale, therefore, from this department would be those added together divided by 2, so £22.5. So then this new merchandiser comes in who's read a few books, been on some of our seminars, and goes, I know what to do. We're going to add a fancy pants chrome, really expensive toaster to those two that we've already got. So what happens now is hardly anyone buys the really expensive one, but also hardly anyone buys the cheaper one now, because we've framed the choice to be in the middle. So now the average, more or less, is £30. So just by adding this decoy, adding this extra frame, framing the choice appropriately, we've fundamentally changed the decisions of our customers without necessarily them knowing. And that really is the essence of what quite a lot of persuasion and behavioral economics is about, particularly with customers and communications, websites, catalogs, sales strategies, and all of those kind of things. There's a lot more subtlety to it than that as well. So it might be that actually the order that you see has a priming effect as well. So you'll notice now the more expensive one we might see first, and therefore that primes us up, and that might lean even more people towards buying the second or even the most expensive one. And indeed, that's how clever restaurants organize their wines, etc., etc. So there's quite a lot to this, and there's been quite a lot of research and practice done over the years. Indeed, we've been teaching a course on this for 12 or 13 years now. So I think everyone's joined us now, so we'll start officially. So hi, I'm John. I'm the CEO and founder of Bunnyfoot. Bunnyfoot's been going for 20 years now. Previously to that, I was a neuroscientist. You've got some pictures of some of the stuff that we've done there. The middle one was actually from 1994, and that's a picture that appeared in The Psychologist. We were doing lots of research on facial perception and manipulations of those. So this was a gender transform. Just to let you know how times have changed. In 1994, this took £120,000 worth of silicon graphics computers working over the weekend in order to produce these images for us. And now, of course, we can do them on this at the click of a button. So how times changes. But now, of course, got out of academia, and we've been doing more practical application of science and psychology via Bunnyfoot for the last few years. And my co-presenter here is Andrew.
Hi, yeah, I'm Andrew. Nice to see you all here. I'm a UX consultant at Bunnyfoot, and I joined my first user-centered design team back in 2003, and have been working in it ever since. And as you can imagine, designing experiences and websites and things and software that engages with people has been an important part of my job. But one of the reasons why I really love this topic of designing for persuasion and designing for emotion and motivation is that it has a really wide application, not just my day job, but also some of the things I do in my spare time. For example, I've been a practitioner of yoga and a yoga teacher for many years. I spent a few years teaching as a high school teacher, and in both of those areas, knowing how to kind of engage and to motivate people and to encourage behavior change is really useful. And I also have 3 little boys at the moment, and I'm currently discovering the power that a rewards chart has over behavior change in that area of my life as well. So you'll see it has these principles that we'll talk about today. They have a wide application.
Awesome.
So at Bunnyfoot, we run a range of training courses. You can see them lined up here on the double diamond chart. For those of you that work in UX or service design, you might discover this, you might recognize this this model, this double diamond model. And you can see we've got a range of courses that run through the whole process from discovery right through to delivery, the kind of process that you might expect if you're working in this field. And you'd be very welcome. We'd love to see you on any of these courses. Each box represents a different course that we teach. They're usually 1-day courses, occasionally 2 days. And what we're going to be talking about today is a small part of what we discuss on our Designing for Persuasion, Emotion and Trust course.
Great. A thing might have popped in. We're doing you an offer if you want to attend any of our courses. And we'll talk more about that at the end if you want as well. It's great actually to see so many of you have introduced yourselves in the chat, said hello. Hopefully there was someone I saw who was having problems not being able to see video. I think that was Stephen. Hopefully you can see and hear us now. Benjamin really likes your comment. Put an expensive bike brand on the expensive toaster and I'm sure I'll end up buying it. Indeed, there's all sorts of factors that influence how we buy things. Now, as a quick extra kind of interactivity thing, normally I show these pictures and I ask everyone what do they think these are, and everyone will pretty much say salt and pepper, which is cool. Even though, you know, you can't tell what size they are, there's no context or anything like that. There's certain visual properties, the visual form of them indicate that they are probably salt and pepper. They might be huge though, but who knows? But assuming they're salt and pepper, can anyone suggest some, oh, Stephen's in now on his phone, great. Can anyone suggest some potential usability problems with them? So feel free to type some in the chat. And I only just found out there's a 10-second lag between me speaking and things appearing in the chat. So they should all come up fairly soon if any of you are typing in there. Which is which, says Simon. Yeah, indeed. We don't know necessarily which is salt and which is pepper. Now, interestingly, if you ask people in the UK, most people will say the one with one hole is salt and the one with loads of holes is pepper. But not everyone, only about 90% know that kind of social convention. And if you go to Europe, you ask Italians and you ask people in Scandinavia, they don't have such a defined mapping. So there's a cultural component to all of this as well. How do they work? Someone says, yeah, well, indeed, there's kind of a visual cue there. Curved top means it might, so there's visual problems as well. The curved top mean they might get dirty. They'll slip out the hand, potentially, we're getting there. I mean, we've also got, yeah, you can't tell how full they are. So they're opaque. So we can't see what's in them, how full they are, whether they're going to be empty. We can't tell whether the person who filled them might have been from Italy, where they don't have the social convention. So they put the pepper in the salt one and the salt and the pepper one and all of that as well. How filling them. Say it was your job in the restaurant to keep them topped up so you provide a good user experience so you're not having them empty. You cannot tell how full they are. So you'd have to go out and test them all of the time, which would be a real pain. The holes might be too big, indeed. They're going to smash if they drop. And there's loads of other ones as well. How do you fill them, especially in an area of COVID? You have to turn these upside down, presumably take that bottom off and fill them, or put your dirty fingers, bad for COVID, on them as well. So there's, even with something as simple as this, there are all sorts of potential usability issues which are determined by their design. Okay, now, do these make it any better? Well, to a certain extent, they do. Now, we don't have so much ambiguity about which is salt and which is pepper. We can fill them from the top. Oh, by the way, S&P also works in different languages as well. Salt et poivre, he says in a bad French accent. But so you can disambiguate certain things by applying certain different designs to it. Can I go back one slide? Yep, there we go. So the salt and pepper is slightly better here. And now, what about these ones? So now it solves lots of those problems that you guys identified. So now we can see which is salt, which is pepper, how full they are. We don't need S&P or some like artificial implicit coding of one hole or many holes. We can have the same tops on there because we can see, you know, immediately what these things are. So these are better from a usability perspective. We can make value judgments about whether they're contaminated, all sorts of stuff with these. So if you're thinking about just these very simple things, yes, reliant on vision as well still to a certain extent. So accessibility issues too, well done. So if you see all of these, which of them is most usable? I think most people would probably agree that the ones on the right are most usable. But when you ask the question, which would you buy? I'm agreeing with Neela here. It just looks ugly. The ones on the right do. I wouldn't give them house room. I hate them. The ones in the middle are even worse, I think. Whereas I'm quite into the kind of retro, bright orange feel, but some people will hate those. So there's more to kind of purchase decisions than just usability. And really this is the point of this little exercise is that even simple things can have multiple usability issues or usage issues. So it's worthwhile having a framework and analyzing the usability and the context of use and all of those kind of things. But also then, if you're choosing to sacrifice some of the usable aspects for other aspects of design, then you should do that from a position of knowledge, knowing what you're sacrificing, rather than causing usability errors or issues through ignorance, which is what we often found, and to be honest, why we have a consultancy. So usability is really important, but it's not the be all and end all. There's other factors involved as well. And indeed, you know, other researchers in other domains have talked about this too. These are just some more of those things as well. Still, the right ones are a bit over-engineered. You don't need the S&P when you can see them. The ones on the left, I put those in because I really like those ones, but there's all sorts of emotional aspects of those as well. So the shiny is all about quality. They'll feel heavy, so that's a signal of quality as well. The sensual curves has been shown to be an emotional factor, often with our liking for certain products as well. So all of these factors come into play when you're designing products as well.
There's a documentary that I like, which kind of makes the same point. It's by a philosopher called Roger Scruton, and it's called Why Beauty Matters. And he says that if you consider only utility, the things that you build will soon be useless. So I like this statement because it reminds us that if we want to connect with people, we need to think more than just about the utility or the usability of something. We need to think about some of the other dimensions that will appeal to us as human beings, including, in this case, beauty. The photograph here shows a certain area in the centre of Reading, and Roger Scruton in the documentary talks about how the centre of, or part of the centre of old Reading was knocked down, a centre which he thought used to be very beautiful, and it was replaced with buildings which seem to have had a very short life, only sort of 40, 50 years, because now nobody wants to move into them, and it's his way of kind of expanding upon this.
In fact, we used to have a walk-in lab for eye tracking studies just around the corner from here, because Reading has been shown to be to have people of a kind of average or good representative footfall for the UK. I used to park just around here and walk through that, and it's an absolute monstrosity. They're pulling lots of it down and refurbing it all at the moment. Okay, yes. So my turn again. So there's different levels that you must design for, as we were saying before. So utility by itself. So Rachel's showing, sorry, the seminar has crashed. I'm hoping that's not for everyone. Great, she's back in now. So just usability and just those functional aspects aren't the be all and end all. And design, particularly when you're trying to engage with customers and you're trying to convert them or create long-term relationships with them as part of good customer experience, it operates on many different levels. And even this is a simplification, but this is a model that we use to try and explain the different factors or the different things that we bring to bear when we're trying to design for things. And I think it's a useful framework to help explaining you know, the different activities that you guys as product owners and as UX designers will need to bring to bear to create great products and great services. So just very quickly, it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Love a good pyramid. There's no point doing the higher order ones until you've done the lower ones. So in terms of this, you need a product or a service that is fundamentally desirable. And you can research all of those things as well. You can do market research, you can use conjoint analysis, you can do all sorts of you know, pre-market testing and things to find out what's going to be desirable. You can use design thinking to try and frame the problem statement. So ultimately you must come up with something that's desirable, otherwise it's pointless making a website or a shop or anything else that will fulfill that. So let's assume that you've done all of that and you create something that's desirable. If you do that, your customer might become your customer or might do whatever you want them to do. So then your next task is really to make access to that usable and accessible. So if you've got a website, it needs to work, it needs to be found, the checkout needs to work, it needs to have appropriate payment methods, it needs to have good information architecture, great visual design, all of those kind of things. And if you create a great usable system, then people will, if they desire that thing and they can then use that system, they then can become your customer or do the behavior that you want. But importantly, it doesn't mean they're going to do it. So next, you then need to think about, well, how do I then have these higher order things in order to persuade them? And also then, once we've got the persuasion nailed, how can we cause them to kind of fall in love and really enjoy interacting with us or our products or our services? So the nice thing about this is, by the way, the emotional and the persuasion, they're kind of more interlinked than they might first appear. because something that is persuasive has to be emotional, and there's trust factors and all sorts of stuff in there as well. But this is a simplification. But you need to think about desirability. You need to make sure the usability layer is there, and then you can think about these higher order things as well. And actually, in fact, they're often a bit more fluid than that. On the right-hand side, you can see that there's various different principles and factors. So there's been lots of, big eggheads have thought about all of this stuff. You should follow the principles or apply the rules. So at the usability, we've got things like Norman's design principles, Nielsen and Mollick's design heuristics. We've got all sorts of, good practice design principles. We've got all the principles of visual perception. So you need to bring all those to bear in the usability layer. And then in the persuasion and also the emotion, most of that is driven from things like social psychology, cognitive psychology to a certain extent, and also behavioral economics. And that's what we're going to talk about later. And in terms of a framework for how you apply this, it's basically user-centered design. You think about the context of use, you apply these rules that you can see on the right-hand side, you then do testing, find out what works, improve and repeat in an iterative cycle. So that's the kind of sum of everything that you're wanting to do. Just a quick extra on this, if you get all of these levels right, at the first level, you can expect people to start to do things with you, but they might bounce if you haven't quite got it right. Once you get the usability level, you're facilitating them to find stuff, browse stuff, search stuff, comprehend stuff, and start to interact with you. But the glory, what we really want to create, how we, what we as designers get out of bed for, is creating all of these factors on the right-hand side. And that's what you get by considering those higher order kind of persuasion and emotional design aspects. So you create engagement, connection, you convince people to trust you, you convert them. They'll return and carry on returning. They'll become advocates, and hopefully they'll become passionate advocates of your service, your product, or your system. Okay, ultimately though, what drives all of this is we're designing for the human brain. So your customer happens to be that, but actually we're designing for their brain. Now, I used to be a neuroscientist, and this is and by the way, we don't really know how the brain works. I was a neuroscientist for 10 years, and that was 20 years ago, and we still don't know really. And this is a massive simplification, but it's a useful model. So many of you have seen this kind of thing before. I'm going to talk about it very quickly because already we're going short of time. So quickly, the most fundamental part of our brain, and the bit that evolved first, was what's called the brainstem, or the reptilian brain. It's that thing in orange there. This looks after our core life functions. It's if a bang goes up over there, we kind of turn. It's what makes us drive towards food and sex and all of those other kind of basic primitive life functions for us. It's non-conscious. It's what crocodiles have, hence why it's called the reptilian brain. It's multitasking and it's very fast. So 0.01 seconds things happen within there. Evolved on top of that, and actually literally on top of that, is the brain structures to do with the mammalian brain, or the midbrain. These evolved later. It's got things like the limbic system, the amygdala, all of those other things you may have heard of. And this has responsibility for things like memory, but also things like emotion and learning, group bonding, certain aspects of kind of social interaction, basic instincts, those kind of things. These are also non-conscious, can also multitask, and they're still quite quick, but they're about 10 times slower than the functions that happen in the reptilian brain. And then finally, on top of that is the thing that we think of as our brain, the kind of foldy thing that you see when you think of a brain. In fact, that's the cortex, or the neocortex, sometimes called. It's a layer of cells, 6 layers deep. And the reason why it's folded is because it's basically just a big sheet, and it's just folded into our skulls in a quite reproducible way. So we all have the same folds to a certain extent. This contains about 70% of it is involved in vision, but it's also involved in our hearing, our motor functions, our sensory functions, and also the higher order kind of things like language, art appreciation, spatial appreciation. But also importantly for our purposes, it's where consciousness is thought to live. And consciousness is a kind of interesting thing, because in contrast to those lower order things that I was talking about, like the instincts, the emotions, the primary drivers for our survival, consciousness is very slow, and it can only do one thing at once. And that's going to be really important later on when we consider things like cognitive biases, etc. This is where we come to Daniel Kahneman, who's the granddaddy of behavioral economics. This is, again, just an oversimplification. You can read more about this in his book, but he classifies basically two major systems within the brain. The system one, which is basically those non-conscious parts, the brainstem and the mammalian brain. So that's the fast stuff, it's subconscious, it's emotional, etc. Versus system two thinking, which is the conscious stuff, and that's slow, it's logical, it's rational. So think really, even more of a simplification, think about those two systems, non-conscious versus conscious, fast versus slow. The system one thinking as well, although we're not always aware of it, it's thought that 80%, 90% of our choices are actually governed by the non-conscious aspects of system one. Hence why it's important to know about those so you can design for them appropriately. And that's really what this is all about.
So there are various writers that are relevant to this field, and here are some of the most important ones. John just mentioned Daniel Kahneman on the right. We've got also the psychologist Robert Cialdini, who back in the 1980s wrote a very influential book called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. BJ Fogg is relevant here. He runs a lab at Stanford University, the Stanford University Persuasion Lab. And being close to Silicon Valley, he's got various ex-students of his that have gone on to found things like Instagram and working at LinkedIn and various other kind of platforms that we're well aware of. So that group had quite an influence there. And we've been teaching courses on persuasion, design, and nudge theory and behavioral science for the last 12 years or so. And this area has become quite trendy now, and you'll find lots of books, lots of writers in this area. But these are still some of the most sort of fundamental writers to turn to first. So it's a good place to start with these guys.
Andrew, can I just interrupt briefly? We've got a comment here saying Nielsen is a bit rigid, which is interesting. I'm presuming you mean Jakob Nielsen. Interestingly, the whole point about Nielsen and why he became prominent to do with usability and everything, it was because he was not rigid compared to what was going on in the late 80s and the early 90s. So the whole thing about the heuristics that he developed with Rolf Mollick was to be higher level heuristics that can be applied by intelligent, experienced people as a total antidote to being rigid and what went before him as well. So it's interesting that you think he's rigid. I would agree with you that it's a bit old school, and actually if you see him present, he can seem quite rigid, but actually his essence of what he did was the opposite of rigidity, hence the heuristics. And interestingly, if we go to the next slide, sorry for interrupting you, Andrew, cognitive biases are often also called heuristics as well. So these are higher level kind of principles that govern, in this case, in Nielsen's usability, but in these cases, all of our system one type behaviors. Sorry, Andrew.
That's okay. So yeah, design for persuasion and behavior changes, mostly to do with something that is called in psychology cognitive biases. So what is a cognitive bias? Some of you may be aware of this already, some of you perhaps not. If you search on cognitive biases on Wikipedia, you'll find a long list of biases that psychologists have now have evidence for. And it's quite an interesting read, actually, because often you'll recognize yourself in some of these biases. And basically, cognitive biases can be described as shortcuts that our minds make when we're interacting with the world. As John was referring to earlier, they're based on system one thinking. So they're fast, they're non-conscious, they're automatic. And if you think about it, we have to make thousands of decisions every day. And if we had to consciously deliberate on each one, this would really paralyze us. So these cognitive biases are sort of non-conscious tendencies of our minds to make a quick decision or quick judgment in a certain way in order to help us effectively live our daily lives. So they've evolved to help us survive in the world. And in this way, they're useful. They usually work for us. They usually guide us towards a suitable decision or choice. But because they're based on rules of thumb rather than more conscious deliberation, they can also sometimes lead us into error. And if you understand some of the cognitive biases that are important in the realm of kind of design, experience design. You can design your products or your communications or your services in a way that makes them more influential by addressing some of these cognitive biases. So you can have a look at them, the ones that are listed on Wikipedia. If you're interested in this area, I'd recommend having a look at this book, You're Not So Smart. It looks at all of the cognitive biases that you see listed here and talks about how they might be playing a part in your life and what to do about that if you can do anything about it at all, being that many of these are happening below your level of conscious awareness. So let's have a look at a few examples of cognitive biases now and look a bit at what the implications of them are. So I'd like to start by asking you a question. And the question is, if a random word is taken from an English text, is it more likely that the word starts with a K, or that K is the third letter in the word? So have a think about that. And when you're ready, enter your answer into the chat feature. So you can write either A if you think the word starts with a K, or B if you think it's that K is the third letter. Which is going to be more present in a text?
Whoa, this feels a bit like Eurovision Song Contest, but it's going a bit faster. The jury seems to be out from what I can see, Andrew.
It's a real mix. I'm seeing lots of A's, I'm seeing some B's.
We'll analyse this later and give you a statistical answer for what you all did, but thank you very much for voting on there.
So the answer is, in fact, B. If you take a typical text, this text contains twice as many words, starting with the letter K. Sorry, hang on. The answer is B. A typical text contains twice as many words with K as the third letter than words that begin with K. But when psychologists have run experiments on this, they've typically found that 70% of people get this wrong. And it's the kind of answer A is much more intuitive. It's much easier to bring to mind words that start with K. And that's why people tend to think that they are more prevalent. Whereas in fact, it's actually the case that you get more words where K is the third letter in that word. And this is related to a cognitive bias called the availability heuristic. And we tend to think things are more likely if these things come easily to mind. This can be a useful rule of thumb. Things that come to mind easily generally do occur more frequently, but not always, as we just saw. And so, for example, many people are unrealistically afraid of flying because, you know, the rare occasions of an aeroplane crash make the headlines. They're very kind of sort of shocking images that we might see, and this leaves a mark on us, and we find it easier to recall this. So we have this disproportionate fear of flying over other modes of transport, which might actually be more dangerous. Or we can think of perhaps the example of the Jaws film, with its very emotive music when the shark's drawing near. Again, it's emotive, it's very easy to recall, and it's led to an unrealistic fear of sharks relative to the number of shark attacks that actually occur in the world. The fear of crime is often much higher than the incidence of crime, again, because it's very easy to recall news headlines about particular crimes. And interestingly, it's been shown that doctors are more likely to prescribe a certain diagnosis, even if that diagnosis is incorrect, if they've had recent kind of experience and exposure to that particular illness. So it's got some real kind of important real-world implications, as you can see, with some of these biases.
Especially in COVID, probably.
Yeah.
About it. Cognitive biases can also be related to research, and we thought it was important to put this in as well, because it's a useful thing to think about if you're carrying out or getting research carried out for you. So on the participant side or the respondent side, you need to be aware and kind of guard for things like the acquiescence bias. So you've probably all seen this in usability tests. People will go through a test, they'll fail on almost every task, and at the end, the researcher asks them, well, how did you find that? And they say, well, it's pretty easy, actually. So quite often they want to tell you what you want to hear. So it's important that you design your protocols and your research protocols to account for that, or to try and prevent that. There's also a thing called social desirability bias. People want to be accepted, fit in, all those kind of things, want to be part of the group. You know, this is particularly important to be aware of in things like focus groups, but any other kind of research endeavor where there's other people there, or there's that social dimension. And there's also an effect of people knowing who the originator of the client is, if you like, in our thing. So quite often in our tests, we will hide who the client is. We'll either create a prototype without a logo or something like that in order to affect, or in order to not affect those prior biases based on previous customer experience or bias or branding effects or any of that. So quite often that's important. Sometimes you actually want those things because they're part of the overall experience, but you should be aware of them and design appropriately. On the other side, you've got problems potentially for the researcher themselves. We've already seen the confirmation bias. So this is people tending to just see the good often. So it's very hard to test your own things. It's very hard to eat your own dog food or mark your own homework or whatever we call it, because you won't even be consciously doing this, but you'll tend to pull out things that you know, confer your opinion of things, or are the same as your hypothesis or support your hypothesis. There's also a cultural bias potentially in there. So I'm about to be you know, 50 years old, God. And you know, we do lots of research for people designing for you know, people who are a lot younger. So we do research with people who are, you know, teenagers or in their early 20s. If I'm doing that research, I need to be aware that I don't share the same cultural cues as them anymore, and therefore, am I the right one to be doing the testing? I might be absolutely the right one because I have a more objective opinion around that, or maybe I'm bringing my own bias to bear. So you need to be very aware of that. And there's also simple things like queuing to do with the question order as well. So sometimes you might need randomized trials and all of those kind of things. So cognitive biases also affect the way that you do your research, which will then affect your ultimate designs. There's a thing called the egocentric bias as well. I'm sure many of you designers listening will come across this one. This is when, you know, whoever the client is, or whoever the hippo is, the highest paid person's opinion, they will say things like, I know my customers, or I really think it should be this because my mum does this, you know, all of those kind of things. You really need to be aware of those. And in fact, if you're designing something yourself, you also need to question your own biases there. People don't think the same way that you do. They don't behave in the same way that you do. They don't think about your product or your service because they don't in the same way you do, because you know all of the underpinnings and everything else about that. So you need to really kind of question your own ego or your egocentric position within your designs and the research that you're doing, and indeed acknowledge that in certain clients that you're working for, or bosses that you're working for as well. And this is just a nice little nice little cartoon that kind of talks about that as well. I mean, conspiracy theories have been, you know, massive during COVID. You see all of those within bubbles and everything else, and this is just you know, a nice little summary of those kind of things. So this is confirmation bias writ large.
So design for persuasion can be used for good and for bad, depending on how you apply it. So for example, there's been lots of talk in the last couple of years about how social media sites are hijacking our mind, making their platforms really overly addictive in a way that is perhaps not in our best interests. And you know, this is all about keeping our attention for as long as possible in order to sell us advertising, which is their business model. So by understanding our cognitive biases or some other psychological vulnerabilities, they can design the platform in such a way as to keep us engaged for as long as possible, perhaps longer than we might ourselves have intended. So, for example, a confirmation bias is amplified by the use of filter bubbles. So the algorithms on the site are only feeding us information which it knows we already are likely to be interested in or like, which excludes other viewpoints from the view. The like button really taps into our need for social approval, and ensures we'll come back again and again to check who has liked our posts. And getting new likes, new comments, new messages triggers the same dopamine that gamblers get when they're playing machines like slot machines, which is making our phones and the apps that we use on them really addictive so that we compulsively check them throughout the day. Or we could talk about news feeds, which scroll infinitely nowadays, or videos that just autoplay. This always keeps us on the site longer than we might have intended. And this is often compared to a study that was done, a kind of interesting little study where it was shown that people ate 70% more soup than normal when the bowl was being secretly refilled from below.
Love that experiment.
Yeah. So having said that, though, persuasion can also very much be used for social good. And Richard Thaler, who wrote the book Nudge, which is all about how we can use some of these techniques in social policy and in government policy, he was recently awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics for his work in this area. And nudge units are being set up by governments around the world, starting with the UK government back in 2010. Which Thaler helped to set up, and which is being run by, still to this day, by David Halpern, who wrote the book that you see above, called Inside the Nudge Unit, which is also an interesting look at what they've done in the first few years of their existence. And two notable early successes are described in this book, Inside the Nudge Unit. And the first one that I'll talk about is all to do with this cognitive bias called status quo or default bias, which is that we tend to stick with default settings. And so understanding this, the nudge unit persuaded the UK government to change the default setting on workplace pensions so that people would now be opted in by default, and with the option to opt out, whereas previously the default was that they were automatically opted out and had to opt in. So this change led to many more people saving into pensions. And the other example that I could mention is just a simple change to a sentence in a tax letter led to millions more pounds being collected. So you can see that sentence here in bold. It says 9 out of 10 people with a debt like yours. This was sent to people who were late on their tax payments. 9 out of 10 people with a debt like yours in your area pay their tax on time. You are in the minority. So if you want people to pay their taxes, signal to them that this is the social norm, and that they are not belonging to this norm with their current behaviour. And this had a 6% increase in people then going on to pay their taxes. So just such a simple change in a sentence, very cheap to implement, had a very powerful effect. One of the other examples I like is this one. So risk compensation is another cognitive bias which designers have put to good use. And basically, the safer that we feel, the more risk we tend to take. And the less safe we feel, the less risk we tend to take. So if you want people to drive more carefully, make them feel less safe. And this is the idea behind what's known as shared space. Urban spaces which are shared by motorists and cyclists and pedestrians, such as the first photo here is actually a roundabout near the station in Oxford, which is where I live. And what they've done is they've removed all of the road markings, they've got rid of traffic lights, they've got rid of curbs and so on. And all of this makes the motorist feel like he's in a less safe environment, which slows them down. And it's been joked that the safest steering wheel is one which has a spike in the middle. If you think about it, you're likely to be a lot more careful if that was the case.
As long as you're not wearing a seatbelt.
Yeah,
definitely. So what we're going to do now is, as expected, we're almost on track, a bit over, but no one's asked a question yet. If you have a question to ask, feel free to put it in the Q&A. What I'm going to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so is just that layer, that persuasion layer. So the kind of tactical design to a certain extent. So when we're designing just to create, a behavioral change or a conversion, that type of thing, as part of our framework. So Andrew's just been showing you a couple of the cognitive biases, and they're really about systems design and the overall architecture of something. And there's lots of others as well that you might bring to bear in how you choose to design an overriding system. But the persuasion elements can come into that as well, and are also often used more tactically as well. So I'll talk briefly about some of those, and I'll show you some examples. Firstly, though, what is persuasion? It quite often gets a bad rap, because if you look at the definitions for it, you'll see that it also comes with questions or statements like inducement, coercion, blandishment, cajolery, all of those kind of things. If Merriam-Webster will have things like, over-persuade, brainwash, that kind of stuff. Here's some more. We've got blarney, wheedle and palaver, all of those kind of things. So there's quite often many negative connotations to do with the application of some of these techniques. And indeed, they can be used for evil, to create conditions where people buy stuff that they don't need, do things that they shouldn't be doing, etc. So people can use these to a bad end rather than a good. So the question becomes, if we can read about all of these things, if you can attend some courses, if you can start applying those to your designs in order to create and influence people towards certain behaviors, is that ethical? Someone's just mentioned in the chat, I can see, dark patterns and such. That's exactly what they are. So dark patterns are the bad application of all of this stuff, whereas good design patterns will be the good application of all of this kind of stuff. So is it ethical? Well, it's not ethical if you're using these specifically as dark patterns. It is ethical if you use it in the correct context. So for me, this is all about if it's on a website, for instance, your customer has come to you to avail themselves of your goods or services or buy your product. It's very different from the context where some pressure salesman doorsteps a granny, or the chuggers are out in force making you feel shamed for ignoring them. So really, it's all about context. And in the web, you've got a very free and open context. People are coming to you, and they're free at the click of a button to go away as well. Someone's asked, is the £120 toaster a dark pattern? Not really, because the person wants to buy a toaster. We're just showing them that actually we're providing them a context and a frame for making a different qualitative choice. We're almost directing them to probably what is the right choice, which is not buy the cheap and cheerful, not go really, really expensive, but pick a good medium. So it's actually probably a good pattern. An example of this is here. So this is, sorry, the pointers don't work on this system. So you'll see at the bottom right is Oxfam's donate page. And the top left are chuggers in the street. Both these designs are trying to get you to donate and get you to sign up for a regular direct debit. You can see in the Oxfam website, it says, I want to make, and the default is monthly. Donation of, and then it has various different brackets, and then it has an amount if you want to just create a single payment as well, or you click on one of those. So the reason why I'm showing this one is we worked for Oxfam, we helped them design this thing. And in fact, this has got about 8 different quite important design aspects within here, which I'm quite happy to share with you. Should we have time, although we are running out of time, so I may just flick on. But the big point about this, and to do with context and ethics and everything, is we were working with Oxfam, and they said a really high proportion of people who sign up for a direct debit within the street from chuggers, and most of the charities employ chuggers, by the way, many of the people will cancel before they make their first payment. And that contrasts to people who are donating, coming to their site of their own free will, being persuaded to donate appropriately. Very few people actually cancel before their payment, and indeed most people carry on donating regularly every month, because that's what they came to do. We've just set the frame for them to actually make the most. So you'll see from the pattern, what we're trying to do is frame this, and most people choose £20. What was interesting, Rachel was a chugger as a student. Good on you. There's also, you know many of these techniques then, I presume. Some people are asking things about this one. There was an interesting aspect of this one. There's loads of different design things within here. But you'll notice that it starts with 5, then goes 20, and goes 40, 42. Many people, when they do these things for basic, they will try and anchor people to the more expensive one on the left-hand side, because we tend to read from left to right. However, it was shown in testing, and presumably it's because this is about donations, we think, rather than purchase, that actually this order was more effective in getting the overall, the average spend to be higher. This one worked better than the other one. So that's just a good lesson about apply the rules. So we applied them the other way around first, test that, see what works, and A/B test, multivariate test, and find out what's going to optimize those in practice. Okay, this is a definition of persuasion. I'm going to flick through that. We will send out this presentation later, and you can read some more of these things that we're going to have to go through quite quickly. Basically, there's a whole spectrum of ethics within this, and we hope that you, as people who want to create a good customer experience and a good relationship with your clients, will choose the ones on the left rather than the ones on the right. So the angel design rather than the evil design. These are some other books that you might want to read, and they all echo those sentiments as well. So it's a good thing to do, as long as you're doing it within the correct context. And if you can square it away with you having a great service or a great product, then also you could argue that it's in the customer's interest to go with you rather than the inferior clients or competition as well. The way I like to think about this whole thing, applying particularly these persuasion techniques to, say, page design or checkout design, all of those kind of things, is what we're trying to do is reduce procrastination. Oh, I'm not sure, go to a competitor, compare a good price, waste my time, have choice paralysis, and all of that kind of stuff. We're actually helping potentially our customers make a good decision there and then. We're driving them towards a good decision that is actually what they came to do that. Someone's asked, never seen that applied to donations before. Did it have any impact? It had a massive impact. It did exactly what we wanted. We've got a case study on our website about it as well, so you can read that. Applying these kind of principles to design is nothing new. So these are First World War propaganda posters. These are, you might say, latter day propaganda posters. There's been all sorts of things written about these, and you should, if you're interested in this stuff, kind of read about all of these. It's interesting how you saw it evolve from the one on the left initially, which kind of looks okay. It looks like it's got higher order design into it, but it's not as effective as the other one that has emotional design. Here, fear, particularly with the kind of biohazard markings and the colorings and the people with all the PPE and everything else. So they're signaling something just by the design of this, and also having the triptych there, having the kind of social endeavor there, protecting the NHS, which is something that we all have an affinity with and all see as a good organization, something that's to be protected. So it's interesting. You might want to read more about all of those kind of things, but these are some of these emotional design and also persuasive patterns within that. It's not necessarily easy. This is in Oxford, where I live. This is meant to be a loiter-proof bench. So it's curved, so you can't sit on it for very long. It's got those things so you can't lie on it, and all of those kind of things. They cost an absolute fortune to install and maintain. But they don't always work. So you can't just apply these basic principles and think that you're going to be doing persuasion and making sure that it works. You've got to apply the rules, understand the context of use, test it, and find out what works better. You'll see people will use things to their own end however they want. So persuasion might seem that it's going to be easy, but it's kind of hard. Why I like it is it's based on science, basically. Yes, those benches do look ugly too. I think they're an abomination. They cost about 80 grand each and something like 20 grand a year to maintain. It's based on science, so I kind of like science. I like the fact that it's not just hand-wavy marketing bullshit. This is actually stuff that you can see from the psychology. You can see it coming in. You can apply, science and the brainy bits from psychology in a proactive, business-centric way. So they apply these established rules, and it's kind of cool. Lots of them are obvious. Lots of them are not so obvious. Neil is making a comment about BJ Fogg here. Yeah, I've got his book here as well. So all of those kind of good things there. There are interesting subtleties. So you can apply these just tactically to page designs. I'm going to show you some of those in a second. but also you can apply it more strategically to overall flows, what's called persuasion architecture as well. Right, very quickly, has anyone asked a question, I'm wondering? No. So if you want to ask a question, do ask away. But if not, I'm going to carry on because I'm running out of time and I've got more slides to share with you. You'll see there's all sorts of different frameworks for applying kind of persuasion or behavioral economics to design. And you'll see that many people have reinvented different frameworks because people like to reinvent their own systems. People have got like new, neo-persuasion and all sorts of things, and they slug off Cialdini, who was one of the founders, or one of the kind of originals. When you look at all of these new ones that come up, actually, if you take a step back and you think, well, actually, that's just Cialdini or Cialdini rebadged, and they often are. So I still like to think, because it's nice and simple, of and we teach often this simple 6 persuasion principles. In fact, there's another one now. Because they're really useful as a first stop. And there are loads of other principles you can apply as well. But let's just consider these 6. It's reciprocity, scarcity, social proof. I've got some examples of these. But also commitment, or what's sometimes called commitment, consistency, authority, and likability. So the bottom 3, just quickly, commitment, consistency. We tend to have an internal kind of picture, a worldview, a psychology of who we are and how we behave. It's determined by our past actions and our past thoughts. And it's influenced massively in terms of our adherence or our continuance of that behavior by how public we make that acknowledgement as well. Again, we could talk more about this. I could talk for a day about commitment, consistency, how to design for it. If you want to look up more of this, look up things like the foot in the door, doing small things first and then asking for more. Authority is all about, we tend to adhere to the requests of people in authority. And this also translates into things like celebrity endorsement and those kind of things as well. And likability is, we tend to do things or adhere to requests from people that we like, who are like us and who we have an affinity with and make us laugh and are amusing, those kind of things. So likability is a good factor as well. And there's these other 3 as well: reciprocity, scarcity, and social proof. So just very quickly, reciprocity is whenever someone gives us something, we feel a psychological obligation almost, an unconscious feeling of indebtedness to return something back to them. And often the interesting thing is the return that we often give people in everyday life tends to be bigger than the original gift, which is kind of interesting. I'm a real fan. I don't have time to go in these today, but I'm a real fan of old-fashioned experiments that just prove all of this. So this is one where people sent out loads of Christmas cards and they're still getting them back today. These things are examples of why people give free free samples and stuff like that. I'm susceptible to all of these things, even though I know that this reciprocity. So it's kind of interesting. Let's just quickly go through these. Oh, I'm not going to have time to do this one, but have a look in the Yes book or the Cialdini book on the experiment to do with tips. It really proves that actually the biggest gift that you can give is not a tangible reward, something that's physical. It's the gift of thought, consideration, or specialness. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time to demonstrate that here. But just to make you aware that this has been thought of, there's a model by Zischerman, I think you pronounce it, called the SAPS model. And it's how, if you're going to reward people for things or you're going to give things, you should do them in this order. You should give them status first, make them important. You should give them access next, you should give them power next, and you should give them stuff next. And the interesting thing about this framework, it's related to gamification, by the way, but the interesting thing about this framework is status doesn't necessarily cost you anything, whereas stuff, which is less effective, tangible stuff, gifts, rewards, those kind of things do. So in designing systems, you might want to consider those types of things with reciprocity, as well as just giving people stuff as a very tactical aim. Here's some examples of kind of tactical systems where they give things. This is kind of guilting you into doing something after you've been endorsed, so it then asks you to do the same for other people. So that's how to build a system, create some momentum within a system. This is another example of people giving you something and actually therefore requiring something of you. This could be a better design, but it shows an example of that. Similarly, Hall of Fame with Amazon. How do you get people to do reviews? Well, you kind of reward them with power and status. Scarcity is this next one. Thank you, Simon. Sorry, I'm overrunning a bit. I'm 1 minute left. Scarcity, things that are in short supply or are viewed to be in short supply are psychologically more or attain a bigger significance. We want them more. So even if you show in this experiment on the left the same biscuits, the people don't know that they're the same biscuits, and then you ask them to come into a room, take a sample from each jar and rate how nice the biscuits are. They will rate the one with fewer in as tasting nicer, being softer, more succulent, all of that kind of stuff. And this has been replicated millions of times across all sorts of things. Scarcity is often related to loss aversion as well. Scarcity was what stimulated this whole kind of toilet paper panic, literally, because even though people who weren't particularly toilet paper centric before, because they saw it running out, they rushed out and overbought all that awful stuff. We are running out of time, and I apologize for that. We kind of thought we might do. Seems we don't have any questions though yet. Good. For those who want to stay with us, we'll carry on for another 5 or 10 minutes, as long as you're able to do that. We've got some nice examples coming up, and then if any questions come in, we're happy to take those as well. If you are going to head off soon, just stay for this one, because this is a really nice one. And it's a little experiment, and it's a little bit of audience interaction with you. So imagine you're seeing one of those cheesy American style infomercials, it's on the shopping channel or whatever it is. Imagine it's for something that you'd actually quite like to buy. So it might be a piece of sports equipment, or the latest, newfangled bit of kitchen equipment, or a kind of really cool tool, all of those typical things. But imagine that you want this thing. It looks kind of good. At the end of it, you are presented with these two messages, loads of stuff about, how you get free extra stuff and all of that lot. But at the end, you're given these two call to action effectively. You're given A, which is operators are waiting, please call now. And B, if operators are busy, please call again. In the chat box, for you yourself, can you type which you think you would be more inclined to respond to? Is it A, operators are busy, please call now? Or is it B, if operators are busy, please call again? We're getting, lots of A's in there. Oh, one B, lots more A's. Lots more A's, some B's, quite a lot of A's. Interesting. Oh, we're getting some rebels, we're getting some B's coming in. So there's an interesting thing actually you can watch with this, because we can all see this chat. I wonder whether actually, this is my next experiment, which I'll show you in a minute, which is an ASH experiment. There's potentially an order effect that's here as well. So if the first 10 people all said A, all of the other people are more likely to say A afterwards because of a social effect. Right, getting back to this one though. The answer for most people, I think most people here said A, even though we're on a kind of thing about persuasion. So there's obviously a trick here. So those people who are trying to think about how I'm trying to hoodwink them are probably going on B. And some people are giving their opinions about Y as well. So the answer is, when these are tested in the wild, is that A is not as effective as B, even though when you ask most people, something like 80 to 90% of people will probably choose something similar or similar to A. Or if you were to design something, so this is the egocentric bias to design coming in, you probably think, well, that looks like it's going to be easier and I'm not going to have to phone again and all of those kind of things. That's more logically, it's more rational. That's the kind of thing that's going to be better, isn't it? And most people think that they're going to respond to that more readily. However, in practice, they will respond to the implicit cues that are involved in B. And those are that, someone's put C, thanks Claire. Those are that, in your mind's eye with B, you kind of see loads of people, so social. You see products flying off the shelves, therefore scarcity. And in fact, it's a good thing that often social norms and scarcity, or social and scarcity, often go together. The reason why one jar is more empty than the other one is because more people have come along and picked ones from that jar. Why did they make the choice? Might as well follow the crowd. So it's all about those kind of things as well. Tom, makes the exact point here in the chat. It's the difference between asking hypothetical behavior rather than seeing what they really do. And this is also my big argument for why you need to do testing. You need to do research rather than just, you know, apply the rules or logic. People do hate waiting on the phone, but interestingly, that's a rationalization and it doesn't necessarily determine their behavior. So that's why we have to test these things. Okay, so there's that one. So as I mentioned some of the social proof things in there. There's the social proof, which is often evidenced by numbers or you know, other aspects to do with stats and those kind of things. There's also an aspect of social learning, which is more like the humanistic stories of things as well. So there's different components that come into all of this. Social is a really powerful shortcut to learning. Now, oh, this is my favorite experiment. We haven't really got time to do it, but if you'll bear with me, let's just do this one. We've almost done it already, by the way. And quite often I trick people in another experiment that I do into doing this already. So Ash in 1952, he had this experiment, which is basically show people those two cards together. And what you've got to do is say which from the second card, A, B, or C, is the same as X. And that is the task. And pretty much there's different variants, they're swapped around, the line lengths change and everything, but it doesn't get much more difficult than that. So if I asked 1 million people 1 million times, pretty much they would always get the answer right, which is C. Yes, and some of you have done this. Rachel's asking, is there a way to watch it back? Yes, we're going to video this and we will host it on a invite-only Vimeo stream. We'll provide you with the links into that. So you would never ever get this wrong. And you're all saying C. Thank you very much. That's good. Now, the interesting thing about this experiment was it was billed to be a perception experiment. But the setup of the experiment was like this, which was a group of people were in a room together and they were asked to do the same task, which you would never get any wrong. And they were asked to answer in turn, going from, on your screen, I normally point to these left to right. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 people there. And what they would do is be shown the cards like we've just seen, and they would go C, 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 etc. Now, the interesting thing about this experiment and why I love it so much is the sixth person, the person you can see kind of zoomed in the middle of that second picture, is the only one that's the actual participant. The rest are all part of the experimental team. And what they do is on half of the trials, on purpose, they all say the wrong thing. And they all agree with the wrong thing. And then our real participant in seat 6, the experiment is, will he change his mind, even though he'd never get any wrong by himself, based on when they're saying it wrong on those wrong trials, will he also say it wrong? And the interesting thing about this experiment is that I think it was 78 or 80% of people on at least one trial out of the many that they'd never ever get wrong by themselves would get at least one wrong and would agree with the wrong crowd because of the previous 6 people have said that. And when it's been looked into deeper about the effect of this, it's partly because they just don't want to stand out from the crowd. They don't want to appear to be different or disagreeing with these people they've just met. And the other part is that social proof from all of those other people is so powerful that they questioned their own perception. So you can see him, he's looking a bit quizzical there. Because they've all said B on this one, he's kind of going, well, it looks like C to me, but I must be wrong. Perhaps too many beers or whatever last night. Yeah, B, I'll agree with all of those as well. So social is really powerful. This is towel persuasion. This was alluded to earlier where, you know, pay your taxes. Most people in your area have paid their taxes. This is really what this one is. So if you read these messages, try and get you to hang up your towels rather than having them washed all the time. The one that is best is the one that has, even though it's kind of illogical, it has a thing that places the other people in proximity nearest to you. So the lesson of this is, if ever you're going to signal social proof, try and make sure you signal it from people who are as like your customers as possible. So in your imagery, in your language, in all of those kind of things, make sure it's as close to the customers you're trying to persuade as possible. That's also how these bubbles of marketing within Facebook work as well. Okay, some quick examples of these. Obviously, there's massive social proof to do with ratings. And in fact, when you look into it more deeply, you'll see the shape of those curves with the negative ones as well is also kind of really interesting. We had a client not long ago who had only 5-star ratings for their products. And we told them they should probably not show those because all of their products, they only have 5 products, and all of their products only had 5-star ratings. And we said, take the ratings off because no one will believe you, because it's good to have some balance. It's good to argue against self-interest. And the interesting thing about negative ones as well, in terms of social proof, is that when you look at the negative ratings, most of them tend to be by nutters, telling you about things that got nothing to do with your product or service. And people don't readily associate themselves with those people because they're ranting or they're wrong. They tend to associate with the people who've given you 5 stars. So it's a good thing to do. You're signaling trust, openness, and also you're signaling good, positive social norms there. Running out of time. These are ratings. Here you'll see they've sectioned down their traveler reviews according to different types of people. Hence, reviews from people like me have more consequence than reviews from business types if I'm a family person, etc. Here's some more about big numbers. Here's some more about order effects and all of those kind of things, more social proof. Here's some social proof, some savings, some free, recency, all sorts of things writ large within those as well. So what you can do is analyze many designs out there and actually assess them against known kind of social proof and scarcity, and also all the other behavioral triggers as well. This is framing, this is showing the default order, all sorts of things going on with these designs as well. Important thing as well is never ever signal negative social proof. One of the problems in the whole COVID crisis is that we've been showing, rather than showing good practice, wear your mask in shops, don't go to crowded beaches and all of those kind of things, the press have sensationalized all the bad stuff, all the non-adherence. So in terms of the recency effect, confirmation bias, all of those kind of things, and negative social proof, we've been highlighting the bad behavior rather than all the good behavior. So people are going, well, everyone else is going into shops not wearing masks, everyone else is going to the beach, everyone else is buying loo rolls, why shouldn't I? Instead, if they showed the positive adherence to what we want them to do, that would be much more effective. And who's involved in all that. Finally, this is part of authority. If you've never come across Milgram's experiments, look them up. It's amazing. Don't have time to go into that. Paradox of choice comes into this, and higher order effects as well. Go and look those kind of things up in terms of your product ranges, and there's loads of other effects. In fact, Barry Schwartz here has written a whole book on that. And I do apologize for going over time. However, we kind of knew we would-ish. We thought we might make it, but we also thought we might be susceptible to another cognitive bias, which is the planning fallacy. I haven't quite worked out whether, because we've acknowledged that we might actually overrun, we were actually adhering to this or falling foul of it. I'm not entirely sure. David, I like your comment. He says, Milgram, the most shocking experiment ever. Indeed it was. It was awesome though. It's been repeated several times. I think Darren Brown did a kind of TV show of it. There's the Stanford prison experiments are awesome as well, and there's all sorts of different ones. They're fascinating in themselves, but they also have some really quite serious consequences as well for all sorts of things, and also all of those white coat researcher biases as well. They have some quite profound consequences. Right, in summing up, yeah, no questions, because we've been kind of doing it all as we go along, so I don't feel too guilty for going over too much. There's so much more to all of this stuff. There's we teach a basic kind of toolkit in our course and in our frameworks, and we have a kind of methodology and a framework for thinking about these things. And within there are I think there's like 60 odd different factors there, and we've shown just some of them here: persuasion, motivation, principles. There's things about trust and credibility, and there's emotional factors, and we teach a course on emotional design as well. But there's also those other things as well: perception, memory, color theory, how to create people in flow states, and everything else. So there's loads of different factors that go in the kind of psychology and the behavioral science part to create the correct or the appropriate or the desired behavioral effects for your customers. But a word of warning, we're like encouraging to read, you know, all of these books. And particularly if you're going to start with one, I would encourage you to read this one. I'm not sure whether it's appearing mirror for you, but it's called Yes. It's lovely. It's got 50 different secrets of persuasion. But it's got 50 different kind of stories and interesting things based on Cialdini's 6 persuasion principles. Lots of these things are quite easy to learn, but like anything, like any design endeavor, they're difficult to apply appropriately often. So it's not just a case of learning all of these and then just throwing them onto a page and hoping that they work. That's the equivalent to you know, a designer using every single felt tip that they've got their hands on to create some splurge just because they can. So when you're going to think about these and start applying them, do apply tactical ones by all means, but don't just throw everything in there, and think about that framework. So apply the rules, think about the context of use, do some research, think about what's going to be most effective in there, apply that in a prototype or apply that in some sort of other experiment, and test what works and then iterate on that. And don't be susceptible to just throwing everything in there, because it'll just be like a splurge of everything. You generally, the most effective is to think about which persuasion cue is going to be most persuasive for your customers, and just using that one and using it really strongly rather than everything, you know, signaling all over the place. So creating good signal to noise effectively within the persuasion domain. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much to everyone who has commented as we've gone through and participated in those little interactive bits. Really appreciate that. It can be quite hard, you know, trying to present to the kind of black mirror of just a screen without getting any sound or feedback. So really appreciate that. We're hoping that maybe our next one, who knows what the world will bring, but maybe we'll be back at Goldsmiths and be seeing you guys face to face again as we did pre-lockdown. If not, we will have another one of these in about 3 months' time. As a kind of taster for that, last week, conversion.com, optimization company, so conversion rate optimization company, like one of the best, so it's conversion.com, they're brilliant. They have recently joined the Sideshow group, of which we are a part as well. We're delighted to have them join the group, and we'll be inviting them and doing a co-seminar with them in 3 months' time. The reason why we're so you know, delighted that Conversion have joined us is that they share the same evidence-based ethos toward design and you know, customer design as we do as well. So they're more the big data, so conversion rate optimization and everything that comes with that. Obviously, us as a service design consultancy, we're more about the qualitative space, the upfront design, the modeling, all of those kind of things. And we have a brilliant kind of overlap almost of our disciplines, but the fundamental of that is all about evidence-driven design, which is what we speak about. So if you're interested in that, we'll invite you to all of that next time. It may be face-to-face. If not, it will be remote. Also, for those of you, what we found about these remote ones is it's great that more people can join us. So as we said, we've had 230 people for this one. We can only tend to fit about 100 face-to-face. So our next one, even if it is face-to-face, we're thinking about doing a kind of dual one. So we'll have you know, it filmed and transmitted live and streamed live from that as well. So people who can't make the trip up to London can join us remotely as well, since we've all got over that threshold. So thanks very much, guys, and we hope to see you in the next one. And thank you very much, Andy, for presenting too. It's great to have someone co-present on these things. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, we've got a countdown for how it's ending. 4, 3, 2.